Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. Let's just wait a minute so more people can join us in the meantime. Okay, I think we can start this session. So what we are seeing across most companies right now is simple. AI adoption is not the issue anymore. So the real issue now everyone is facing is control. And the questions are, who owns the quality? Where does the risk sit? And what actually breaks when you try to scale this across teams and markets? And that's what we will focus on today. Before we start, just some quick notes. You will find the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen, so feel free to drop the questions there anytime. We'll go through them in the second half of this webinar. We also have AI live interpreting to French and German, so if you'd like to follow the conversation in any of those languages, please use the globe icon also at the bottom of the screen. And now, before Petra takes the stage, let me just start with something very quick. So a question to our attendees today. Um, so in one word, what's your biggest concern when using AI? This could be quality, security, compliance, cost, anything. So when you are adopting AI for content and translation, what is your biggest concern? And I will allow a few seconds so we can check some answers in the meantime. You just have to scan the QR code or join Slido using these codes. Oh, that's also some of the concerns of some people. Anyone else? Consistency, yes, makes sense. Control, ecological cost, quality. Yeah. We all face hallucinations as well and confidentiality. Great, thank you. Well, this is not surprising, and this is actually the key point. There aren't really technology problems. I think that what we have nowadays is control and accountability problems. So Petra will exactly help us break this down. She works directly with enterprise clients on these challenges, from setting up the right controls to scaling AI safely across content and operations. So I would now share the stage with Petra. Petra, over to you.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, depending on where you are logging in from today. My name is Petra Angeli, and I run global solutions here at Acolad. And I would like to start out this session by acknowledging the environment that we are all operating in right now. You can run to the next slide there for that. Thank you. So really, where we are at right now, it's a strange high velocity time to be a leader in global operations. According to the latest Nimdzi 100 report, our industry has reached a point of extreme polarization. We see a 50-50 split. Half of the global top 100 are achieving double-digit growth by aggressively adapting, while the other half are seeing revenue stagnate or decline. If you are an executive in a tier one organization, you are typically being squeezed right now. So your board sees a translation as a feature appearing in every software they own, and they are asking why you haven't pressed that save button on your localization budget yet. On the other hand, your legal and security teams are terrified of IP leakage, rightfully so. So today we're moving past of talking about what AI can do and phase into language solutions integration. The goal isn't just to buy translations anymore. It is also to orchestrate a complex ecosystem of technology, data, and expertise. Why we're here today is to give you that vocabulary to define safe and strategic for your stakeholders. This is the operational reality. We are past that era of the pilot project or the innovation lab experiment. And I'm not going to talk about the miracle of AI either. Instead, we'll talk about the discipline of AI. And we'll look at what quiet failures are, the subtle, dangerous errors that slip through the cracks, and more importantly, how we build the architectural guardrails to make sure that those failures never reach the field. The goal for today isn't also just to talk about translation, it's also to talk about how you as leaders can provide the confidence your organization needs to move fast without losing its grip on security, quality, and cost. Now, before we discuss the quality of the content being produced, we have to look at the battlefield where this content actually lives and the security of the data itself. The way your customers find information has fundamentally shifted in the last 24 months. We have moved from a search economy to an answer economy. And according to 2026 search metrics, 80% of all search queries now result in 0 clicks. This is a staggering statistic for any global brand manager. It basically means that 80% of the time, users are not clicking through to your carefully audited, legally vetted, and brand aligned websites. They're basically just staying on the search results page, reading a 3-sentence AI generated overview. Or worse, they are directly going to a platform like ChatGPT or Gemini, which is today handling over 2 billion queries every single day, and they get the information from there. So why does this matter for us all? It matters because the user never sees your source of truth. They only see the AI synthesis of your brand. And if that synthesis contains a quiet failure, maybe a hallucinated spec or an outdated price or a version mixed safety instruction, we'll talk about this later, that user has really no way of knowing, and really they aren't going to go to your site to double check. That's the reality of things. They are taking the AI words as the source of truth. And yet the human element hasn't actually disappeared. If we look at the CSA research, it continues to show that 76% of global consumers demand information in their native language, and 40% will simply walk away if the site isn't localized. They want the answers in their language, and they want it instantly. If we don't govern the answer the AI provides, we aren't actually just losing clicks. We are losing our authority and scaling our liability on a global stage. Now let's look at shadow AI. The risk, talking about this, it's not just external. The biggest internal threat to your enterprise today is shadow AI. And this is a quiet, pervasive risk that exists in every department of every tier 1 company represented here. We all know how this happens. Your teams are under immense pressure to deliver. Maybe a marketing manager in Germany needs to localize a 50-page strategy deck for the Japanese market by Friday. And the official corporate translation process, which includes security checks, vendor management, human review, it is robust, but let's say it takes 10 days. In the eyes of a high performer trying to hit a deadline, that official process really just looks like a roadblock. So what do? They don't mean to be a security risk. They aren't trying to violate corporate policy. They are high performers trying to do their jobs. So they open a browser tab, they go to a free public LLM, maybe ChatGPT, and they paste that strategy deck. that contains unreleased product features, internal pricing models, and perhaps a 5-year roadmap data, just to get a quick draft. According to 2025 data, please jump to the next slide. So looking at 2025 data, which is produced from Varonis and Menlo Security, the truth is 98% of organizations currently have employees doing exactly this. That's data-backed. Even more alarming, 68% of employees admit to using personal free-tier accounts to process work data. To that employee, it is just a quick draft or a quick translation. But to your organization, that is a catastrophic data breach in progress. So we have to understand the mechanics of this risk. When that data enters a public free-tier LLM, you have essentially signed away your property rights. That information is absorbed into the training set. It becomes part of the intelligence of the model. It can and eventually will be surfaced in responses to other users, including your direct competitors. We have already seen cases where sensitive internal code or HR performance reviews have appeared in suggestions of public AI assistants used by third parties. Last year, the average cost of data breach hit a record of $10.22 million. But for a tier 1 organization, the cost isn't just a fine from a regulator. It's also the loss of competitive advantage. If your proprietary source code or your 5-year strategic plan is used to train a public model, there is no undo button. You cannot untrain an LLM on your data once it has been ingested. It is a permanent loss of IP. The market for data AI is now estimated at 9.3 billion. Frontier AI labs are spending billions to acquire high-quality, domain-specific data for model alignment and evaluation. So when your teams are going out there and using public tools, you are effectively subsidizing your competitors' models with your own IP. By moving to by moving to secure translation gateway, you really stop leaking value and start curating private strategic data assets, which is essentially necessary in an AI-driven market. And also just to mention, this is especially critical under GDPR and global privacy frameworks. If your compliance officer asks where specific data went and who verified it and where it is stored, you need to be able to answer that with a log file. You need to be able to back that up. So really, security by design is the only way to scale. If you aren't pivoting your teams with a centralized, orchestrated way to use AI, you are losing your competitive advantage over time. And so now, if we look at the quiet failure, let's define that primary enemy of quality. The most dangerous thing about AI in technical and enterprise documentation isn't when it fails to work. It's actually when it works too well, stylistically. This is what's called the quiet failure. And to understand why this happens, we have to look at and under the hood of what a large language model actually is and how it works. Despite the name artificial intelligence, these models are prediction engines. They are not fact engines. They are probabilistic and not deterministic. What does this mean? It means that they don't actually understand the laws of physics or the rules of your industry. They basically just understand the probability of syntax. Think about how your smartphone's autofill feature, you can type in how are, and it will suggest the next word to be you. Not because it knows that you're really super curious about whoever you're texting and how they feel, but it's because it's in its training data. You follows how are about 1,000,000 times. And an LLM is essentially a very, very sophisticated version of that. But here is the critical part. Researchers at places like Microsoft and Google have found that even when you give an AI the correct facts in a prompt, like let's say you upload a PDF that you want to get translated, the model's prior knowledge can override that context. Particularly in a translation context, this means that the AI doesn't treat your source text as the absolute truth. It basically treats it as a suggestion. It understands the probability of syntax in the target language better than it understands the requirement for that one-to-one fidelity of your original document. So if the AI's internal brain is 99% sure that payment terms are net 30 based on 500 terabytes of global training data, it might perform an unsolicited source correction. So it might overrule the specific net 90 instructions in your source document because it assumes that your original text has a typo. It isn't lying to you. It is simply defaulting to the global average and translating what it thinks you meant to say. And such quiet failures really occur because AI is designed to look confident. It is, and to please. It is trained to truly please the user, and it doesn't crash or give you an error message when it's wrong. It just produces a hallucination that looks really confident, and it's formatted in your corporate style, and it's using your exact brand voice. That's what's often referred to nowadays in the AI world as the confidence trap. In the past, machine translation was clunky. So if we think about neural machine translation, you go to Google Translate, you can kind of tell that it's not quite perfect and the errors are obvious. But an LLM, it produces output that is so elegant. It triggers a fluency bias in the human reviewer. The better the translation looks, the less likely the human will interrogate the facts against the source. Another example is the pattern of version mixing. This is a common failure in long life cycle industries like energy and aerospace or medtech. Consider a case where an AI is asked to translate a safety section for a 2026 product release based on a massive repository of legacy data. The AI performs this task beautifully. It has used the right text, the grammar looks flawless, and the tone is great, except it pulls a critical safety clearance measurement from a 2018 specification instead of the 2026 source text. Why is that? It's because in the training data, the 2018 specification may have appeared 500 different times in the legacy documents, while the 2026 spec maybe only appeared 5 times because it's new, right? To the model, the 2018 number was much more statistically probable. It chose the likely answer over the accurate translation. So you might think, surely the QA checks will catch this, right? There are comparisons from source to target when it comes to these type of things. But the issue is that quiet failure is not always numerical. It's often semantic. An automated check might flag a missing digit, yes, but it won't flag a semantic drift, where the AI chooses a target language verb that is 99% right, but it misses the 1% legal distinction that's required for a regulated market. To a reviewer who is likely overworked and maybe skimming a 200-page document, it looks perfect, right? But because the output is so fluent, the human brain often just stops translating and just you start reading. You're reading the 200 pages and you stop verifying the translation because it reads perfect. You stop looking and comparing to the source. In a regulated market, an outdated spec or a slight shift in legal nuance can be a reason for a total product recall. Or worse, it could be also a reason for a site accident. We have to stop treating AI as a content writer or a translator. A writer understands the weight of a warning label. A translator is bound to the source text unless he's told otherwise. An AI is a target language regeneration engine. It produces a candidate draft that requires multi-stage inspection that goes far beyond a simple spell check. If we don't treat it with that level of suspicion, we are essentially letting an eloquent intern write or translate our safety manuals without any supervision. We are prioritizing the appearance of quality over the fact of safety. And that's an important one to be mindful of. But let's look at some actual legal precedents so that you know what I'm talking about isn't just made up. This is actual real life, and this is what we are experiencing. So, to make sure I'm not just talking about hypotheticals, let's look at the legal reality. There are three cases that I'm going to present to you, and the first one is maybe the most important legal precedent for our industry in the last decade. An airline chatbot. You can see Air Canada there. I don't mind actually sharing the names because these are public information and they are known, right? So you can look them up. They are real actual events that have happened. In this case, that chatbot ended up inventing a bereavement policy that did not exist. And it was promising a passenger refund that was strictly against company rules. So when the passenger went and sued for the promised amount, the airline's legal team argued that the chatbot was a totally separate legal entity and that the company shouldn't be held responsible for those autonomous errors. But guess what? The court's ruling was, of course, not in that direction. They ruled that a brand is legally responsible for its output, regardless of the author. The judge effectively said, the machine is yours, so the mistake is yours. You cannot delegate your legal liability to an algorithm. For everyone in this room, this is a large warning. If your AI-generated manual tells a technician to turn valve A instead of valve B, saying that the AI told me to will not stand up in the court of law. You own the risk. Looking at the second case, in this case, a legal filing was submitted to a US federal court containing 6 perfectly formatted, authoritative-looking legal precedents, complete with case numbers and quotes, and well, every single one of them was fake. It was invented by the AI that knew what a legal writing and legal document should look like, but it had none of the facts of the law. And this is exactly how hallucination manifests in, for instance, technical documentation. The AI, with its confidence, goes and it creates a safety clearance that looks right because it fits that statistical pattern of your previous manuals. But it can be completely factually fabricated. And this honestly isn't a bug that will be fixed in a next version. It is a fundamental risk because it is how probabilistic models work. And finally, the third case there, we have to also look at and consider what risk there is to brand equity and cultural standing. In this third case, when Amazon launched in Sweden, they relied on automated translation to move thousands of product listings into Swedish overnight. And because they used AI and the AI lacked cultural context and the human understanding of nuance, it famously translated rooster on a product listing for children's toys into Swedish profanity. And well, it was a really large case, and the internet laughed, and it was a huge meme. And actually, to this day, it is. But for a tier one enterprise, the lesson is an important one. This wasn't actually a technical glitch. The translation could have been linguistically correct in a vacuum. It was a failure of the governance layer. In a technical manual, that same lack of context in a warnings section or maybe a hazardous materials table, it creates an immediate legal liability. It proves that you cannot set it and just forget it in any market. These cases prove that AI failures aren't just accidents. They are the result of a lack of discipline. You are the guardians of your organization's knowledge integrity. And so you need to be mindful of all this. Moving to the next one, and how you want to talk about scaling and focusing on using AI models. So when most organizations talk about this, they typically come and they might ask, well, what model should we use? Should it be GPT-4? Should it be cloud? Should it be Gemini? Maybe a custom trained internal model, right? But for a tier one enterprise, the model is only about 10% of the solution. The real bottleneck, the thing that causes the entire global operation to collapse, is typically the workflow. Most global teams are still operating with manual glue. If yours isn't, you are the lucky ones, but you might dig deeper and notice that that still exists. What this refers to is the thousands of hours that project managers or regional leaders spend copying and pasting content out of a content management system into an AI tool, back into a document, and then circulating it to maybe 3 different reviewers via email because the system didn't talk to the AI. Scaling requires global content supply chain, and this means moving to an API-first strategy where your translation layer is a background utility embedded directly into your CMS, your PIM, or your code repositories. The latest and recent later briefing, it confirms this structural shift towards this trend. So really, success no longer depends on the standalone tools, but more so on how effectively large language companies and capabilities are integrated into the wider enterprise technology landscape. This nowadays and in our world is referred to as translation as feature, which I referenced earlier as well. If you use AI to increase content volume by 10, but your workflow is still manual, you have basically replaced a translation cost with an operational drag. And so for a tier one buyer, the goal is to achieve headless localization, what you see on the screen, where content can move from creating to a secure or AI orchestration to publication all the way without any human copy pasting. This transforms your department from a cost center into a high velocity growth engine. But how do you actually achieve this, right? Let's look at how can you lead this change. Most of all, you have to stop treating all your content like it's the same. A tier one enterprise might produce 100 million words of content a year, even more. Not all of those words are worth a human review. In fact, if you try to review everything, you may bankrupt your entire department or miss every launch date because there is a massive content explosion. But on the other hand, some of those words may even be worth 3 human reviews. This risk impact matrix may help you categorize AI outputs so you can decide where to automate fully and where to keep a strict human in the loop process. The examples you see on this slide are to more so help visualize the spectrum of risk. However, it's important to remember these categorizations aren't necessarily one size fits all. What is shown here is a baseline to help us describe the logic. The actual mapping depends on your unique business context. So you do have to think about how does this apply to you. But it is a standardization that might already apply. Let's start at the bottom. So where the stakes are lower, the low volume, low risk on the bottom left, think of things here like the regionally variable promotional content. We're talking about thousands of sales banners or localized ads. Because the content is promotional and temporary, we may be able to rely on high-level AI guardrails rather than line-by-line editing. While as if we look at high volume and low risk on the bottom right, this is where AI truly shines. This standard product description or basic metadata, if the AI describes a shirt as midnight blue instead of navy, the world doesn't end. This can be your playground for maximum automation. Now, if we move up the vertical axis, the risk to our brand and legal standing increases. This is where oversight becomes non-negotiable. Low volume and high risk on the top left, these are things like corporate branding statements or customer-facing UI text, perhaps. Think maybe a checkout button or error messages. Even though the volume can be fairly low, these are high visibility touch points. All your users will see it. One AI hallucination here can actually damage brand trust instantly. So these should always get a final human check. And finally, the high volume, high risk. This is the true danger zone. We're looking at regulated industry content, legal disclaimers, healthcare info. The volume can be massive, but the margin for error is zero. For these, you don't just need AI. You need sophisticated, multi-layered validation, subject matter experts auditing the process regularly, and human checks as part of the process. That is the reality. The goal of this matrix, however, isn't just to manage risk. It's to give you the confidence to scale. By identifying the low risk quadrants, you can free up your experts to focus their energy where it actually matters, on the high risk content that defines your brand and that keeps you compliant. This is how you move from linguistic review to risk-based validation. Now, let's move to the next slide. And as we close today, I want to leave you with a different way to think about your value as a global brand leaders for your organizations. To reflect the strategic value that you provide to your C-suite, I would recommend that you start talking about risk mitigated. Report on your catch rate. You can talk and tell your leadership, our governance layer stopped 40 critical errors per 100 pages. When you show them the errors you caught, those quiet failures that I talked about, the hallucinated clearances or the ghost specs, you can prove that the expensive human review process isn't a bottleneck. It's actually a safety feature. You aren't slowing down the process. You're armoring the company against a recall or a lawsuit. In the age of AI-driven volume, the discipline of control is actually your most valuable asset. It is what allows you to scale without fear. It is what allows you to move into new markets with confidence. You aren't just managing words, you're managing the organization's business intelligence. Technology generates the content, right? Humans decide whether it deserves to see the light of day, whether it's content generation or translation, in fact. And we have seen this work. We have seen a tier one fintech company increase their content output by 400% while actually reducing their security risk profile. It isn't magic, it's governance. It is the result of taking control of the architecture instead of just chasing the newest model or the newest technology. So thank you for your time today. I hope that this gives you some interesting insights to take back to your organization. Let's see if we have time for questions, and please feel free to connect with me via LinkedIn. You see the QR code there. If you want to chat, I am available. And let me look at the Q&A.
Perfect. Thank you, Petra. There's a lot here, and this is where usually it gets more real, right, with examples, because every company is dealing with this differently. So now let's address some questions. Let me perhaps start with this one. So how do you actually control what teams are doing with AI today? Because I feel like a lot of usage happens outside the official tools, right?
Yes, so you've heard the statistics. Indeed, it is more common than people would like to recognize or think that it is, but it's actually quite substantial amount of people using unofficial AI tools or free tier AI tools. But honestly, you cannot really solve this shadow AI by banning it. You solve it by making the approved option a more powerful and easier to use one. And by offering a secure, fast internal platform and workflow, your employees will naturally gravitate towards it instead of those personal tools. At the same time, centralizing the usage will also give you visibility into how the AI is used for translations or content generation, while you can also keep the safeguards in place.
So if a company is already using tools like, for example, DeepL or ChatGPT, what really changes when you move to a platform like Leah, for example?
Well, the shift, it isn't really just about better technology when considering using Leah and moving to Leah, but it's also about adding that professional oversight and integration. Because tools like DeepL or ChatGPT or Gemini in and of itself, they give fast and pretty generic outputs, but they lack an in-depth context, accountability, brand precision, consultancy. With a platform like Leah, supported by an experienced language service provider like Acolad, you can combine the AI efficiency with the 30 years of industry experience. And so this means that your content isn't just generated or translated when you need it, it's also reviewed, it's refined, it's aligned with your brand, your terminology, your regulatory needs. Acolad also acts as a language solutions integrator, so we can actually embed AI into your workflows and adding the human validation wherever it's needed. That way you can get the speed and the reliability instead of choosing one over the other. That's mainly the benefit.
Great. And now going back a bit to your matrix, could you also give us an example, a concrete example of content that seemed low risk, but would actually fall into a high risk category once AI is involved?
Sure. So this might sound like a challenging question. Let me see. To be honest, even something that may seem harmless, like perhaps an internal employee handbook or like a work from home FAQ, things like this can actually become high risk when AI is used to generate or summarize it. Companies may often assume that these materials are low stakes, but AI can introduce these subtle but serious errors, these quiet failures, like perhaps it could default to common industry norms instead of the company's actual policies, or it could omit some safety details. And in that case, the result can be legal liability if the employees rely on incorrect information, or maybe it could result in HR disputes. So it really breaks down the trust in internal tools. So even routine internal content sometimes needs careful validation when AI is used to generate or translate that content, because these smaller inaccuracies can lead to pretty major consequences, surprisingly. So that would be my example.
Indeed. Yes, and that applies to all other departments, industries, etc., right? It can
Yeah,
easily
exactly.
grow big. Okay, so I don't see any other questions. Anyone else would like to make questions? I'll give it a moment.
And of course, if you guys end up coming up with any questions after the fact, maybe you think about, because it was a lot of information, right, that I transferred over to you and different concepts. So here, if you have other questions down the line, feel free to reach us. We did get one question, which was to ask whether we use customer content to train our engines. No, of course, we do not use customer content to train engines. That would be in breach of all security and data privacy um, concepts. So no, of course not. Unless we want to actually custom train an engine for that particular customer that is for them exclusively. Then we use their data as approved.
Of course. Okay, so I think that's it. Let's wrap this up. Thanks everyone for joining and for the questions. If you would like to continue the conversation, as Petra said, feel free to reach out directly to her or any of the Acolad team. We are also running another session soon, so May 28th, actually. So if you would like to join us, we will have also two customers here with us, Kone and OP, and they will share their own experience and real examples of their daily operations. So thank you again and enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you, Petra.
Thank you, everybody. Have a nice day.
Bye.